Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of On the Shoulders of Giants with Rabbi Shmuel Bloom. Today we're going to be talking about the building of Agudas Yisroel. Back in 1923, as we learned, the first Knesset Gedolim with the Chafetz Chaim, they started the Agudas Yisroel, where all the Jews come together to work together to create one big community. Because before the Holocaust, all the Jewish yeshivas, communities, and rabbanim was based in Europe. After the Holocaust, that Lo Aleinu, that got destroyed, and it moved to America, so now they needed to rebuild what the Agudah was in Europe. They needed to rebuild it in America because that's where most of the Jews were. So Rabbi Bloom is going to take us behind the scenes with incredible stories and insights from Reb Elimelech Tress, and later on Rabbi Moshe share kind of the beginning of the years of Agudas Yisroel in America, how the Torah Jewish community turned from almost nothing. They had nobody right after the Churban of Europe, that they were mamish wiped out. There was almost nothing. How they brought it to the thriving and huge community all over the United States that it is today. It was such an incredible and long journey. I'm Yisrael Yudkowsky. You are listening to the Foundations Podcast. We are going to start talking today about Agudas Yisroel, how it all started. Obviously, we spoke about the Knesset Gedolim with the Chafetz Chaim. You know, there's the famous video of the Chafetz Chaim. We all were like, oh, the Chafetz Chaim, finally have a video. But the other historic part of that video is that the first Knesset Gedolim, that it literally changed the whole, life of the Jews in Europe and ultimately in America and Eretz Yisrael. So we're going to start talking about Agudas Yisroel, how and when it all started. So Rabbi Bloom, take it away.
Last time we spoke about the difficult situation in Europe at the time of the early 1900s, and they tried to they started working in already 1909, 1912 or 13 was the Katowice Convention, and they wanted to have a Knesset to bring everybody together. First World War broke out. It wasn't the communication wasn't the way it is today. The traveling wasn't the way it is today. The First World War broke out, and they did not have the Knesset Gedolim until 1923. 1923, they finally had the gathering together. It was world news. The video that you have of the film that you have, it's not a video, it didn't have video at that time. The film that you have of the Chafetz Chaim was taken by Movie Tone News, because it was world news, and in the movie theaters in America, they used to have to show two films, and between the two films they had the international news. And this was international news, that they took pictures of what was happening in Europe, in Vienna, and showed the people coming into the Knesset Gedolim, this big gathering of Orthodox Jews from around the world. What happened was that it developed the type of excitement that the founders of Agudas Yisroel had been anxious for. Instead of being the downtrodden, old-fashioned orthodoxy and Torah Jews and the secularism and political Zionism, that was the spirit of the future, they actually saw here that they were really people who were dedicated for the Masorah, to listen to Gedolei Yisrael, to come back and to bring back Torah and Yiddishkeit the way it should be and the way it belongs. So the plans that they worked out, the resolutions that they made, for instance, one of the big problems we mentioned last time also was the girls. The girls didn't have any education.
There was no Beis Yaakov. There was no Beis Yaakov.
Sorah Shnir, it's not a Beis Yaakov, but it was small, it wasn't supported. At that time, the Gedolei Yisroel came out and said Beis Yaakov is the step of the future. It's the vision of the future. It's what we have to do and we have to support. Eis lasos Hashem heferu sarasecha. All the time we said not to teach girls in Jewish schools. Let them learn at home. But the homes weren't there. They weren't teaching them. And the street was teaching the reverse. So they felt that they had to support the work of Beis Yaakov, and all of a sudden Beis Yaakov began to flourish, and tens and hundreds of schools and cities all over Europe began to develop Beis Yaakovs, which trained girls. The girls that had the Basia, they had the youth groups, what we call today Benos Agudas Yisroel, is they started going, And the girls and the women began to play a role in the maintenance of Torah and the maintenance of Yiddishkeit, which was a tremendous, tremendous effect. There was the press. The newspapers were always anti-religious. We used to make a fun of Torah Jews. And all of a sudden, Agudas Yisroel, it inspired. He says, a Yaakov journal, newspapers, Hamodia, other newspapers that came. Hamodia was from Europe, or started in Europe. And started, and you were able to open up a newspaper and you see a Torah-dic view. You see that the real truth is what's happening in the world. And the guidance and direction from Gedolim Yisroel. This was another factor. And then, of course, the Knesset was in Elul. And on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, in Ger, they have a break between Shachris and Musaf, and they have an hour of learning. And the Ger Rebbe said, please bring me a Gemara Brochus. I'm going to start Brochus Daf Beis with a Daf Yomi. And once the Rebbe did that, so thousands of Hasidim joined. So this unity of Klal Yisroel, where in cities throughout of Europe, he says, and in America, we'll talk about soon, he says, people started learning Daf Yomi, all learning together. He says that was the excitement that started from 1923.
It was that Rosh Hashanah Taka,
that was Rosh Hashanah,
that it started?
Tafresh Pei Daled, right? Tafresh Pei Daled. There was, Poli Agudas Yisroel was started for workers. People needed parnasa, to train people for jobs, to help people get jobs. He said they started Poli Agudas Yisroel, the workers of Agudas Yisroel, in order to do. But you didn't have to go to the Freya, to the non-religious in order to get parnasa, in order to get a job. Here you had from the Yidden, Agudas Yisroel working together to try to help you
to create from job environments,
from job environments, and from jobs, and from businessmen to hire from people to get them to work. So they started carrying Eretz Yisroel. Is the support of Eretz Yisroel and the Moetzes, and they started Moetzes in Eretz Yisroel, kibbutzim, moshavim, that they started in Eretz Yisroel, and they started working on it. And all of these developments started going almost like the golden age of Agudas Yisroel in the time of Europe. They had community elections. Now, Agudas Yisroel began to take part in community elections, and they had representatives in the community, in the community, and they did well. They did 20, 30, 40%, almost as much better than even in Eretz Yisroel today. About 34% of the people in the Jewish community councils were representatives of Agudas Yisroel. They sent representatives to the Polish Congress, to the Sejm. Reb Meir Shapiro, the Reish Rov, Rav Levine, were representatives of Agudas Yisroel in the Congress of Poland.
It's like Reb Meir Shapiro and they're like congressmen.
They were congressmen. Wow. They were congressmen in the Polish Congress. So these are the things that were going on is at the time, which developed from the Knesset Gedolim from the 1923, the Elul 1923. Tafresh Pei Gimel, Knesset Gedolim. But
so it was mamish, it's crazy to see, before there was just small communities, and here, they were doing their thing, they were doing that. There's no newspapers, no Kivin Beis Yaakov, and no in the government, and mamish nothing. And this, the mamish the video of the Chafetz Chaim, that Knesset Gedolim, mamish just changed, kind of put them on the map. You could say is
exactly
mamish right. Such a dramatic change. Yeah,
right. It was a dramatic change in order to stem the tide of losing the youth, of losing the community, of being downtrodden, of being disrespected. All of a sudden, they got back their respect. And they got back what didn't change the whole world. There was still a fight. There's still a battle. There was still the secularists. They were communists. There's Jewish communists. There's still battles on the street, but at least they were battling. At least they were fighting. They were fighting back and making progress. Turn to the United States. At this time, also in preparation for the Knesset Gedolim, the leaders of Agudas Yisroel sent a delegation to the United States to try to build an Agudas Yisroel in the United States. Rav Hildasheimer, Rameh Don Platzka, I think Rav Nosson Birnbaum, Dr. Nerberma was a Baal Tshuva. He was one of the assistants of Herzl in starting the Zionist movement. And then he realized that it wasn't taking us to the right place, and ultimately became a Baal Tshuva and was the philosopher, the ideologue, and so for Agudas Yisroel, the one who did many of the writings of Agudas Yisroel, is they came to America, and they went to Philadelphia and New York and Baltimore and Boston. They went to cities throughout, and they had nice crowds because here these very choshev rabbanim came from Europe, and they wanted to, and most of the Jews in America were refugees, who were people who had come in the 1890s or the 1910s or 20s, and they remembered these rabbanim, so they came. They had significant crowd, but Lemaisa didn't really get much done because the Americans weren't interested in us. People would come off the boat and throw the shaitel in the river, and they're coming to the free America. It's an
free country,
free country, the goldene medina, the golden country, but that belonged to Europe. There were a few Yechidim, a few individuals who felt that this ruach that was coming from Europe should be recreated also in America, as difficult as it was. There were hardly any yeshivas, hardly any schools.
Even in Europe, where, obviously there were a lot of Jewish communities, but there wasn't like a strong, base. It was kind of each thing on its own. So even them, because most of them did come before the 1923. So even them, what they had in Europe, it wasn't the like big power, what they wanted to bring now. So, even if they did say, we'll go back to like the from days in Europe, it still wasn't what they were trying to bring. It was, something completely new to them.
Exactly. Yeah. And there were some Yechidim who wanted to hold on. And I know Reb David Schoenfeld came a little bit later. He came here, was a refugee, he had learned in yeshiva in Europe, but he couldn't find anybody, couldn't find chavrusa. He was walking on a street in the east side, and he heard a voice that sounded like somebody learning Torah. It didn't sound familiar for the streets that he was used to in America. And he followed it. He went up to, I think, the second store in where the voice was coming from, and it was Reb Yisroel, who was giving a daf yomi.
Wow.
And he had a few young boys who were the nucleus of an Agudas Yisroel there, and they were learning daf yomi. And he says, "This is where I belong." And he went and he joined, and he went and became a part of that group. These are the types of little groups that you had. A group in Williamsburg, this was on the east side, which was, they used to always call this the branch number 1 of Agudas Yisroel. It was the first one was found in America.
And so like there was Agudas Yisroel but in America, but it was still like very small. It wasn't as big as Europe yet.
But not only wasn't it as big as Europe, the whole concept of what it was different. It was a place where the few who were interested in holding on to their Torah and Yiddishkeit had a place to go. They had minyanim, that little branch minyanim. They got together sometimes for shiurim, like Reb Yisroel gave a daf yomi for them. They had little places where they get together. I think I told over the last time the story of Tzirei and Tziros Agudas Yisroel of Brownsville. The notes that Yonah Lazar, my son-in-law, Yonah Lazar, had, that his grandmother wrote in the minutes. She was the secretary of the Tzirei Agudas Yisroel, and she wrote in the minutes that on that meeting, a new member, Jean Mantell, and her sister Elizabeth came to join. And they spoke about what their agenda was. And one of the things they were doing, they were raising money for this new concept of girls' schools in Beis Yaakov in Europe, and trying to help them. So it was a place where it wasn't much being done. It certainly wasn't the type of things that were going on. They didn't have a press, and they didn't have a couple of daf yomi shiurim, not many of that either. It was a place to come to daven, where those who wanted to hold on to the Masorah, those who wanted to hold on to Torah and Yiddishkeit, in the street they couldn't find it. Where they worked, they couldn't find it. But here they had the opportunity to be among a group of people who had this concept.
So it's kind of like whoever wanted it, it gave them that option, but it's not necessarily that they went out to push it and to grow.
Right.
And,
that for sure not. It was, they would one by one, they would try to get people to come in, but it was like a little bit of an oasis, a place where they could go to escape from what was happening in America, to be able to have chavrusa, to have some people, as they say, like-minded people who are going to join them and keep together. And that's what Agudas Yisroel in America was primarily through the 1930s. When Gedolim Yisroel came, some Gedolim Yisroel came to raise money for the yeshivas, Reb Chana Wasserman, they came. So they had somebody to go to. They had a source. And the young men and women who were involved in Agudas Yisroel had somebody to relate, somebody to learn from, because otherwise they didn't have that type of leadership in America. So it was small. It was, say, a place to eat shalashudas together, to daven together.
So it's kind of, the way I understand it, it's the exact opposite now, is that America, I mean, that's where everything is, Jewish and all the newspapers and the Rabbanim and the yeshiva. And if you go out to Europe, it's like you need to find that like small community of 12 families or the Chabad shul to go to kind of like still have that little connection and minyan on Shabbos and, like you said, shalashudas together. And so it's like it was just the opposite, is that all the yeshivas were in Europe, and in America that's where like you needed to like bits and pieces here and there.
A very good point. As Jews in Gullus. In Gullus, we move from one country to another. We don't put deep roots for any one place. So this is really what the when they wanted to know something about the Hashkaf of Agudas Yisroel, they would go to the library. They read books. They would see articles from Reb Yaakov Rosenheim, the president of World Agudas Yisroel. He says, but they didn't have that handy. They couldn't go online and figure and listen to Torah Anytime and listen to to get a podcast from JFoundations. They didn't have that, so they had to search for it. So it had to be really people who were looking for it, people who were looking and searching for it, and they found it. And there were Yechidim in the different groups that really held on, and they're the ones who had their children go on. Now, in the 1930s, there was a development. One of these people who came into the Agudah branch, I think on the east side, was a fellow who didn't really fit in so easily. He wasn't one of these European refugees, somebody who learned in yeshiva in Europe. He was somebody who was born in America, really didn't have much of a yeshiva education. His family was from, went to college educated, but somehow he fell into the group and he liked the chavrusa there. And ultimately, he rose to, oil rises to the top. Ultimately, he rose to a position where he became the leader of the organization of Agudas Yisroel of America. And his name was Mike Tress. They called him Mike. The book, they called him Mike. They called him Mike. The family now wants to call him Reb Elimelech Gabriel Tress. Is by his Hebrew name because. But you
said they had the name project in the early.
That's right. Not yet.
Well, wasn't that?
He says yes. They what he called later on. We'll talk about Jasmul's had a chic project. The chic project is Shem Yisrael Kodesh, and trying to get people to use their Hebrew names. And people changed their names actually. So
legally they changed it.
Not necessarily. This is what they call it. Yeah. As we go along in history, when children were born, they gave the children Hebrew names, right? So they didn't have to change their names. That became the standard. People, of course, were known by their by their Hebrew names.
Yeah, like even now, like even on passports, everything. It's just you have your Hebrew name.
Hebrew names because that's the name that's given. But that time everybody had an English name. Even the frumest of the frum, foremost. I had one friend, his name was Yehuda. His parents actually gave him a Hebrew name, and he would write on his papers, "Y. Brody." He was embarrassed by it, right? He did he was embarrassed to use the Hebrew name, But slowly, I say the Mike Tress became Melech Gabriel Tress in today's vernacular. Now it's embarrassing to call him Mike, right? Although they still used it on the cover of the book that they wrote about him. And he had organizational talent and organizational ability, and he realized that Agudas Yisroel had to be more than just a place where you come to eat shalshudas together. And he hired at first that ultimately became Dr. Gershon Kranzler, who my wife taught on him. He was became later on the principal of the Talmudical Academy of Baltimore, of TA in Baltimore. But at that time, he was one of the young fellows in the group, and he started building an organization that had membership, that had membership lists, that began to do things. He had to do things beyond what was done in just being together, which was
it's not only that place that whoever wants could come, it's also to reach out to others and to
more than reach out to do things for others. Now it happened to be at the time just before the Second World War, and America began to change, and refugees started coming from Europe who had to escape Europe in the late 1930s, that they escaped the Nazi regimes. And they came to America. And who would take them in? Where would they go? They bought a building, 616 Bedford Avenue, and 616 Bedford became a refugee home. It's where people could come to stay temporarily until they can find a place to stay. They had a place to go. They had a shul there. It's just, for the community and for Agudas Yisroel, the things they've been doing until now. But they said, in order to get out of Europe, you had to have an affidavit. Somebody had to sign that they're going to support you. You're not going to become a welfare case and be supported by the government. It was very different today. It is today. It was there when a refugee came. America didn't want to have all these poor people that has to come to welfare, and the tax money has to support them. So in order to get a visa to come into the United States, you had to have somebody sign an affidavit. They went around. They got the people.
It's kind of like adoption papers, to make sure there's a family that's going to help you and take care of you.
Take care of you when you come in. Louis Septimus, who was one of the founders of Agudas Yisroel in America, all of a sudden had like 50 or 100 cousins. There's all his cousins he was signing for and saying that they basically were saving their lives. Somebody had to go to the government to advocate for them, to advocate for cases, to try to get them in, to get the visas. And at that time, there was no Agudas Yisroel as we know it today. They're representing with constituent services, with representing the government.
But there wasn't really anyone to turn to if you needed help with these stuff.
Right, and that had to be developed. And here, the founding of an Agudas Yisroel that was an active organization that was doing things, he says, began to develop and began to service this. HaKadosh Baruch Hu maybe prepared the refuah before the Makkah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew what was going to happen a few years later, and he saw to it that Agudas Yisroel began to be formed and develop an office. And Mike Tress used to run back and forth from Washington and so on, develop contacts in order to be able to help.
Where you mean run back
from New York, from New York to Washington?
That's where the main. That's where the main.
It was in New York. It was in Williamsburg. Right, the office was in Williamsburg, and that's where it worked. So the main,
most of the Jews, that's like the area that they were.
That was the east side. They upgraded to Williamsburg. Right, the east side. Actually, there were differences between the Agudah on the east side and the Agudah in Williamsburg. The Agudah in on the east side were more European refugees. People had come from European, and America was already people who upgraded to living in Williamsburg. We're more American and more American born, or young youth coming from America, and sometimes didn't disagree on everything. So when they got together at conventions or other things, he says they worked to have to work things out between them. It wasn't we were always Jews. Two Jews, three opinions.
Always need to have the two opinions.
You have to have two opinions and two outlooks and two. It's
like the jokes they say. There was this town that there was only one firm guy there. There was no he was the only guy that lived there. So on Shabbos he used to try to bring. He was like a wealthy guy. He built himself a own shul, and he used to bring for Shabbos, he used to bring yeshiva guys and have guests, at least on Shabbos to try to have a minyan there, because his mom, she was the only from person there. So one time the few yeshiva bachurim came over, and they're on the way to shul. They see in the middle of the town there's another shul. So whose is that? He's like, oh, I also built that shul. So he said, why do you need two shuls? You're literally the only guy in this town. He said, oh, this is the shul that I daven in, and this shul I never step a foot in. You always need to have,
exactly
the two pieces.
Right. So they had the group, but slowly but surely that developed. And Agudas Yisroel, as the war went on, and as the refugees started coming, after the war, Mike Tress went to the DP camps, the displaced person camps. He came back with the stories of what happened in Europe. The Jewish Tribune, by the way, they say that people didn't know what was happening in the Jewish Tribune, which was the newspaper of Agudas Yisroel at the time. They had all the stories in the 1940s and 42 and 43 and 4. They knew, maybe didn't know to the extent it was. But then...
Well, this with the Holocaust?
With the Holocaust, right? They say people, we didn't know. Right, but
it probably is such a hard. First of all, also now we have the internet, everything. Even if it doesn't happen, everybody knows about it. Right. But back then, it was probably much harder for it to spread, and also it was kind of such a crazy thing because the Jews, especially I'm sure, so after they started with all the newspapers and the government and everything. That it was all starting, it was probably such a hard thing to believe. What are you even talking about? Concentration camps, it was probably such a hard, thing to believe.
Right. So therefore, people think, or people say, that, well, in America we didn't know, and the government didn't know, and the others, but I looked at the newspapers, the Jewish Tribune, which was the Agudas Yisroel newspaper in 1942 and 43, and they tell all the stories. Maybe not to the extent, but they talk about Jews being killed and so on. They knew. Maybe they didn't want to know, some people. Certainly the government, Roosevelt, probably didn't want to know. But they knew, and they actually, Agudas Yisroel was big enough that they were picketed. They were picketed by a group that wanted to boycott the Polish government, and they didn't want to send food there. And Agudas Yisroel was sending packages of food to the starving Jews.
Agudas Yisroel from America
were sending packages. So they came to boycott, to picket against Agudas Yisroel for sending food for the Jews. Because they wanted to. The most important thing to them was the war effort. America should win the war. They don't care if.
This is during the Holocaust, when it was
during the Holocaust, during the time of the Holocaust. So this is. But Agudas Yisroel developed into after the war. You had all of a sudden these American Jews who were trying to maintain their Torah and their Yiddishkeit and so on, but then they got trained. They were Americans.
Well, just quick to go back, what happened to the Agudas Yisroel that was based in Europe? Obviously during the war, I'm sure it got destroyed, but where was Agudas Yisroel holding? Because the main, like you said, it was mainly in Europe, and in America it was just kind of starting to be built. So were there those few years that Agudas Yisroel came out, it was very small?
During the war, after the war?
Yeah, I'm saying what?
After the war, they were gone.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I actually take it back a little bit. For the most part, Agudas Yisroel was gone. They were killed out. Right, hundreds of thousands of Jews, who were members of Agudas Yisroel at the time, the masses of frum Jews were annihilated. In the DP camps, there were groups that started groups of Agudas Yisroel. Wow. In the displaced, I have pictures of. I probably can show you pictures of people. Now the war is over. We're not just going to be, refugees. We're going to build. We're going to do, and we're going to build Agudas Yisroel.
This is in Europe.
This is in Europe, in the DP camps. And Mike Tress went to the DP camps, and he saw what was going on there, and he brought back their stories to America and said, America has to help. And Baruch Hashem, we survived the war, and we can help. But what developed was a mizug, a joining together of Americans who knew America and knew how to act in America, and people who had the spirit of Agudas Yisroel. Those few survivors that came out, and they slowly came into America.
Because they were in Europe before the war when Agudah was really.
But they knew what Agudas Yisroel was. They knew what Agudas Yisroel was capable of, and they knew what to build. So the rebuilding of America was done by this combination, this homogenation of Americans who held strong in the 20s and 30s, who joined together now with the refugees who are coming, who with many of them Talmidei Chachamim and activists and people who knew the hashkafa of Agudas Yisroel, and they were able to put it together. And this joint effort, he says, began to develop into a new rebuilding of Torah and Yiddishkeit in America.
Of kind of what Agudas Yisroel and what the Jewish community was in Europe before the war. So the people that were there and lived it and knew what it was, they came to America, but then there are the people who lived in America that kind of knew how to, put it into action and actually, make it happen based on, because obviously Europe and America was probably also before the war and after the war, and, it was so different.
Again, and they worked together with the work of during the war, they had developed the Vat and it's also to save Jews, to bring Jews out. And also Reb Shagafai Mendelovich had started Torah Judaism. And Torah Judaism was working to build yeshivas, to build day schools throughout the country and all sections of New York. So these Jews who were building Agudas Yisroel and building the Torah Judaism were rebuilding an infrastructure for Torah Yiddishkeit in this country. But they were still weak. They were refugees, and they were the small group that were there together. They worked together and slowly were building things together. They got very much into action also in 1956 when they had the Hungarian Revolution.
What was that? The Hungarian Revolution?
In communism, the Jews who remained in Europe were taken over by communism. The Russians moved in, and they took care of Austria and Hungary and Poland. They took control of it and also did not allow Torah and Yiddishkeit to flourish and to grow. And in 1956, there was a revolution in Hungary, and there was no government. So many of the Jews used it to sneak over the border. The border was open, and they went over the border into Austria, and Agudas Yisroel organized a home in Austria for the refugees, for people who came in. I had my father's brother and sister-in-law and nephews, my cousins came over at that time, and many Jews just came from Hungary. They used the opportunity to escape from Hungary. But again, they came to nothing. Right, somebody had to advocate for them in the government to allow them to come into the United States, and somebody had to help them go to yeshivas, go to the schools, get a housing. And Agudas still had the experience of doing that after the Second World War, so they went again very much into action. Again, Mr. Tress was in Vienna and built up that whole area. There was another high point in the development of Agudas Yisroel of America. Mr. Tress got sick then, and the organization fell a little bit in disrepair. There was the weak leadership. There was a board of
where was it holding before this happened? Then the TAC already did have a big, strong base.
It was growing again, not a very strong base, but a base. Rabbi Shera had joined the staff of Agudas Yisroel in 1943. He worked as a volunteer. They had a Baltimore. He was a bacher in Yeshivas Nei Yisroel in Baltimore, and they had a Baltimore convention, and he was very active in it. And then he joined the staff of Agudas Yisroel and worked. He did the public relations for them. He did a lot of their writing, a lot of the newspapers. That they had. He wrote it. He wrote a column there, a lot of the hashkafa, and he was on the staff. But after the war, he felt there was not much to do. So he wanted to go into business. He got into business. He went to Reb Aaron. Reb Aaron Kotler, was the leader of Agudas Yisroel at that time, and the head of the Moetzes, and he told him that he was going to leave. The story has it. I don't remember exactly the story, but the Rebbitzin started crying. He says, "And how can you leave?" And the Rabbanim didn't let Rabbi Sherrill. They say he stayed in the organization. But it wasn't, they didn't really have, most of the work was being done to build the yeshivas, to build the communities and so on. And Agudas Yisroel didn't have that much of a role to play at that time.
Mm-hmm. And how did they fit in with the government? Because I know now, obviously, there's, much tighter with the government. And here in Israel, they have the parties and all that. Like, at that point, were they strong, like, in the government, or was it just kind of like their own thing, building the yeshivas and communities?
It was weak. It was weak. The government affairs for the Jewish community were being handled by organizations like the American Jewish Congress, and they were working. There shouldn't be anti-Semitism, and sometimes we disagreed with them. For the most part, they represented us, and from community minded its own business. Yechiel had the problems getting Jews in from Europe, getting Jews from Hungary. There's some work that was done, but not really in a major way. In a major way, for the most part,
they're doing their own thing when needed.
We have to build a community, and we used a lot of time to fry Yidden to represent us, and to build.
They did have, there was was more known like the Jewish community, not Dafka from.
Yeah, the non-from community had the B'nai B'rith and the World Jewish Congress and the American Jewish Congress. And they worked representing the Jewish community, discrimination, anti-Semitism, on issues like that. Rabbi Sher told me about a meeting that he had. There was a board of Balabatim who were in charge of the finances of the organization, and there were times they didn't get paid for almost a year.
Wow.
The staff, the little staff that they had, I think they were 9 months behind in pay, and they were spending all their time borrowing money from people in order to pay the payroll. And once you borrow money from somebody, you can't ask them for a contribution. Right, so they weren't able to ask for a contribution, so they were
like,
stuck.
Could you donate money to the yeshiva, and then here's it back, what I owe you? Like, it doesn't really work,
Right. So they end up.
Unfortunately, it sounds familiar. I'm sure a lot of yeshivas in Kolim that they're months behind in pay, and even still today, it's
right. So that time the finances of the organization were very bad, and there was a meeting of the management board, and they said to Rabbi Shera, you're going to have to take over the fundraising. You're going to have to go and raise funds for the organization. And Rabbi Sher was so upset. It was something that he hated to do. And he wasn't interested in it. And he walked out of the meeting. And Mr. Plagman was a cousin of Mr. Tress's, and Rabbi Sher also, they were cousins.
Rabbi Sher and Mr. Tress were cousins?
Cousins. And their mothers were sisters. And Mr. Plagman came out and went over to Rabbi Shera and said, Rabbi Shera, even if the Balabatim raise the money for you, it's going to be their organization, and they're going to be running it.
Yeah, at the end of the day, where the money comes from, that's who runs it.
Exactly.
No matter what.
If you raise the money, then it'll be able to be your organization, and you're going to be able to shape it in the way that you'd like to have it, and the way it should be. And Rabbi Sher thought it over, and he undertook that assignment. And he went out to raise money, and he went way beyond the frum community. He became very close to Speaker McCormick, the Speaker of the House, representatives from Massachusetts, from Boston. And he got very close to him. And Mike McCormick used to send out letters for projects of Agudas Yisroel, and raise money then, and he gave him contacts. He was, Mike McCormick called Rabbi Sher his rabbi. So at that time, it was the first time that the Orthodox Jew got close to somebody, and he was helpful. And he raised money from the Henry Ford. He's from the Ford Motor Company. He made contacts and so on, and got them to fund projects of the Agudah, which helped the finance of the Agudah. And the Agudah began to come out. He also made a rule that we're not allowed to borrow any money. It says borrowing money is like eating chametz on Pesach. It's also to do it. And
why? Why is that, huh?
he says, because then you can't raise the money. Exactly for that reason. So you end up not money, and you're always you're further and further into debt.
You're just borrowing money to pay back, and then borrowing again to pay back that bill, and
right. So you're spending all your time on that, and you can't get any work done. You can't get any work done. You can't raise any funds, and you can't get any work done. So we're going to stop borrowing money, and we'll have to raise it. And if we don't have it, we won't pay the bills. But ultimately, we get paid. And Rabbi Sher turned into a situation where Agudas Yisroel paid their bills. They caught up on to the payroll, and they paid things on time. And they were raising money and supporting themselves. Now
this is a point already that after Rabbi Sher took over as the head.
Rabbi Sher took over as the head. Now, something important happened then. What happened was I mentioned that the support for when you need government support and government aid, you need help from the government. They would go to those who were the professionals and the American Jewish Congress, American Jewish Committee, and the B'nai B'rith, and so on, people with years and years of experience of relations with the political leadership. And they would represent us. What happened was an issue came up, the issue of aid for non-public schools. The yeshivas needed money, and the yeshivas were growing. And by right, the government should support the yeshivas, especially the secular work, the helping out the child, the secular studies. It has nothing to do with religion. So now, the ones who were fighting, their Bible, their Torah was separation of church and state. That the government has to be separate from religion and cannot give a penny to a yeshiva.
This is also the Jews.
The Jews, mainly the Jews. This was their big thing. This is the way we're going to fight anti-Semitism. We're going to fight anti-Semitism because we're not going to give money to the Catholics. We're not going to give money to the other religious schools. We're only going to go, these are secular Jews. They had no interest in the yeshivas. And they said separation of church and state was one of their most important principles. That's democracy. That's the United States of America. And we have to fight for it.
Probably also sounds that they had much more power in the government at that point, because the Agudas Yisroel from community, they were just starting in the government, and they were there for many years before.
Exactly.
So.
But whereas up until now we used them as our representatives, it now came an issue where we couldn't use them.
We weren't happy with the representation.
Right. They were on the other side. They were against us. And so in 1961, when they had hearings for a Elementary and Secondary Education Act in Congress, Rabbi Shera went to Washington, he went to Congress, and he testified in Congress for the bill instead of all the Jews being against it. And it was such news that the New York Times carried it on the front page.
Wow.
That a rabbi should be for aid to non-public schools.
Just telling everything they know is the Jews are against it. It's always
the Jews against the Catholics. The Protestants couldn't care either way, and it was the Jews against the Protestants, against the Catholics.
And now you have a Jew with the Catholics that is agreeing.
In fact, when he went into the congressional hearing, they had one section where the people who were for the bill were sitting, and one section where the Alta against. And Rabbi Sher walked in with his yarmulke, and he sat down on the side of the people who were for the bill with the with the Catholics and the others who were fighting for the bill. And the usher said, "Rabbi, I think you're on the wrong side." He says, "No, I'm on the right side." And he's on the right side, and his testimony was printed in the New York Times. Wow. So that was the first development.
Did they talk? Did they talk? Get the funds?
So what happened was Rabbi Sher made friendship with a congressman by the name of Hugh Carey, and they worked day and night. And they worked to pass the Elementary and Secondary School Education Act with the concept of helping the child, that it's not a problem. You're not helping the school. You're not helping religion. Religion, separation of church and state. But what you're doing is you're helping the child. And you're helping the child. You can aid the child by giving aid to the children, to the students, in order to have their better education. And that is something which ultimately passed. And also developed a very, very warm and close relationship between Rabbi Shera and Hugh Carey, who afterwards ran for governor of New York and became the governor of New York. And there were times when I remember came in the office, Rabbi Shera would get a call, I'm in the area, can I stop by? And the governor of New York State would come up the elevator on 5 Beekman Street and come into Rabbi Shera's office and discuss how to run the New York State.
Oh, wow.
Right, so that was the
They
development.
used to ask like advice from Rabbi Shera and stuff.
Used to ask advice from Rabbi Shera, and Rabbi Shera used to give them advice.
Rabbi Shera built New York,
That's right, in many ways. If you think that the things that he did well, right? We won't take blame for the things that he didn't do well. But this developed into a situation. The other part of that situation was the association of rabbinical and Talmudic schools, arts, which was the government gave a lot of money for college students, again, for the individuals, student loans, work study programs, grants, and the question is whether yeshivas were eligible. And yeshivas were eligible through what they call the 3-letter rule. If 3 colleges say that they'll accept your credits, then you're considered a college. And that's the way they got in. I was in the R Yisroel, and but there were accrediting agencies for the colleges, and you really had to be a part of the accrediting agency. I went with Rabbi Weinberg to the Middle States Accreditation Organization. Yeshivas R Yisroel wanted to be accredited, and discussed with him, having the ability of what R Yisroel had to do in order to join their accrediting agency. And they said, well, of course, if you're going to be a rabbi, you have to know English, so you have to take X number of credits in English, and in order to give smicha, you have to have credits in English and history and so on. And Rabbi Weinberg walked out of the meeting and said something that I remember for forever. He says, listen to what he means, not what he said. Right? And he means I wasn't going to bring you in. He says they weren't interested. They were interested in general studies, general colleges, so on. So in the end, the yeshivas had to start their own accrediting agency that the government should recognize. And Rabbi Shera worked to get the arts, the Association of Advanced Rabbinic and Talmudic Schools, the accrediting agency, to get it accredited by the government, recognized as an accrediting agency. And now yeshivas were able to get these programs directly as colleges. That, between the elementary school work, elementary and secondary school, and the college work, meant for the yeshivas hundreds of millions of dollars, by at this point, billions of dollars. And the billions of dollars of money that went to support the yeshivas, which was the work of Agudas Yisroel, and became a primary work of Agudas Yisroel to the point that we opened the Washington office. Here's a full-time Washington office. Rabbi Yisrael used to say, if in the Second World War, if Agudas Yisroel had a Washington office, maybe we could have saved many, many Jewish lives. And here at Washington office, worked on all the different issues that we had to work, and build up a team at one point of 5 lawyers working for the Shmir Shabbos, for 8 non-public schools, helping the yeshivas, to Esregim. The fruit fly was a fly that went into the Mediterranean fruit fly, went into citrus crops. And the United States was afraid that it's going to come to the United States and destroy its crops. Destroy the oranges in Florida and so on. So the United States put a ban. No citrus fruits no fruits can come into the United States.
Oh, you have till now. You have, in the airport, you can't bring any fruits.
Right, you can't bring any fruits.
Yeah.
Right, so they had esregim fruits. And esregim can have the Mediterranean fruit fly.
And they used to grow them.
They grow them in Eretz Yisroel.
In Eretz Yisroel and bring to America.
And bring it to like we have today. It's a major business for Eretz Yisroel and exporting, and people want to have Moshe Feinstein or Tshuva and so on. It's a mile to have an estrich from Eretz Yisroel. And the government said no. That was an economic hardship for Eretz Yisroel, and also all the Jews who wanted to have an estrich for Eretz Yisroel. So with his contacts, Rabbi Shera, the agricultural department, worked out a deal with the Israeli government and the American government that the Esrogim stay in a warehouse for a period of time. They get inspected. And if they get inspected, they get a seal on it, inspected by the United States government, and you're able to bring it into the United States.
Wow.
Right? So that was something. Now, the American Jewish Congress couldn't care less. American Jewish Committee, right? B'nai B'rith, right? These organizations, this wasn't their interest. But when there was an Agudas Yisroel that had these types of concerns, who understood the community, understood the needs of the community, and had the access to be able to go to the Congress, is to go to the United States government and represent the Orthodox community. This was the beginning of what Rabbi Shera used to call an independent orthodoxy. An independent orthodoxy, an orthodoxy spoke for itself. Today we've
didn't rely on the other parties to help them.
On the other parties, we were able to help. We built coalitions with different groups. Sometimes we went together with them when we agreed. Sometimes we went with the Catholics. Sometimes we went with other groups. We went with every group. We developed a coalition, but we were a party. We were a people. Agudas Yisroel was able to represent the from community, the growing Orthodox community in the United States.
That is it for today. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you were able to learn something new. Hope you were able to put something in your pocket for life. Get ready for next week. We have a huge episode coming. It is going to be on Rabbi Moshe Sher's life. Rabbi Shmuel Bloom, who worked on almost a daily basis with Rabbi Sher for almost 50 years, is going to share with us incredible stories. One of them is Rabbi Sher going head-to-head with the Italian mafia. It is an episode that you definitely do not want to miss. So make sure you are subscribed and following wherever you are listening on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, Amazon Music, or wherever it may be. Also, give us a 5-star review, a thumbs up. Share the episode with a friend and family so they can enjoy it as well. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you have a wonderful day. We will be back next week.